afternoon and welcome to today's webcast on the future of work. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today for this webcast brought to you by the Chartered Banker Institute, Manchester Metropolitan University and ICAEW Northwest. Please be aware that we are recording this webcast and it will be available to watch on demand shortly afterwards. If you would like to ask our panel any questions, please submit them via the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We hope that you enjoy today's session and thank you for joining us. I will now hand over to today's chair, Albert, who will start the session.
Thank you, Emma. As Emma said, my name is Albert and I'm a lecturer at MMU. I'll be chairing today's webcast where we will be looking at, or we will be taking a look at how the world of work has changed over the last 24 to 30 months and what that future of work might look like for finance professionals. During the past 2 years, a substantial amount of change took place globally. What we thought was the norm changed overnight, and the pandemic and the aftershocks has brought change to so many aspects of our daily lives and routines, our practices and beliefs. We've gone from one extreme to the other overnight, and now we as a society are trying to figure out what that future of work might look like going forward. As you can see, I'm working from our Manchester offices today, as my broadband at home is rather untrustworthy, to say the least. But you are not here to listen to my very, very persistent broadband struggles, but rather to hear what our very knowledgeable panelists have to say. So on that note, I'm going to ask our panelists to introduce themselves, and I'm just going to go by order of participants on my screen. So if we can start with you, Crystal, then Rosina, then Sid, then Charlene.
Hi, my name is Crystal Wilkinson. I'm a senior lecturer in human resource management here at Manchester Metropolitan University and a researcher in the Centre for Decent Work and Productivity. So my research focuses on the work-life interface, flexibility at work, including one of the projects was how employees, and particularly we were looking at employees who live on their own, transitions to home working at quite short notice due to the pandemic, and kind of because of that I've been kind of looking at quite a lot of the literature around remote working and all the debate about hybrid that's followed.
Crystal, my name is Rosina Murdoch. I'm a director in Deloitte's human capital practice and I lead our human capital practice in the north of England. I consult on this type of topic with many of our public sector clients. As you know, many organisations have gone through these changes over the past number of years now, and can bring some of my own experiences working at Deloitte as well.
My name's Sid and I run More Accountancy. We're a South Manchester based practice. We are a very small team of 8 people, which makes us very akin to a small team or a small department within industry or practice. We have a mixture of part-timers and full-timers, and we've actually been doing flexible working for quite a few years now. So I'm hoping to add some value by talking about our pre-COVID and post-COVID experiences.
Hi everyone, my name's Charlene and I'm Head of HR and People Communications at Chartered Banker Institute. We aim to support and develop bankers' educational professional development throughout their careers. We employ 63 staff, and before the pandemic hit, the majority were office-based Monday to Friday. We've now adopted a hybrid approach as a permanent way of working, so I'm hoping I can offer some insights into the changes we've seen and how they've affected the employee experience.
Thank you so much for that. So maybe Charlene, seeing that you were the last to introduce yourself, maybe we can start with you and then open up the question to the rest of the panelists. But based on your experience over the last 24 to 30 months, what would you say are the key changes that you've witnessed to the working life of financial services professionals?
Absolutely. So probably the most obvious change has been, of course, the move to working at home. It was fairly rapid that we had to all move to become home-based. Before the pandemic, although we had some staff who were home-based, for the most part, home working was quite rare. And I think there was a bit of a perception industry-wide that people might not be as productive when home working, but I think this myth is well and truly outdated now, as it's been proved that colleagues are just as, if not more, productive and effective when working at home. The other key change I've noticed is the increased focus on well-being and ensuring colleagues have access to the levels of support they require. The Chartered Banker Institute had a wellbeing team before the pandemic hit, but it's really been brought to the forefront of employee experience, and rightly so, I think. Suddenly, companies who've never done much in the way of wellbeing were understanding the value of it, and I think this can only be a good thing. So we quickly had to understand how our colleagues were feeling and what they needed to enable them to work to their best, and figure out how we were going to provide that for them.
And maybe Sid, on your side, have you had similar experiences?
Yeah, so previously we hadn't done much hybrid working. We've been flexibly working in terms of hours that people work, starting early, finishing late, or having be able to take time off to go to kids' events at school and that sort of thing. But actually, being a really small team, we struggled initially with COVID because our IT wasn't up to scratch, and trying to communicate that within the team and get them all set up was really difficult. And the team felt the pressure as well as the leadership side of things. I think in terms of biggest issues that we had was during COVID was trying to actually get staff members able to fit in childcare and homeschooling with working from home. So we tried to offer more flexibility with people logging in at weekends and evenings. But then that had mental health issues because it created less boundaries. And I think that was a really, really big issue for quite a lot of our staff who are parents as well. CARBA, like the Chartered Institute Banker, CARBA is an institute body that has been promoting mental health a lot for the ICAEW. And I think, again, we've signposted staff to that where necessary. I think just generally the transition was difficult for use of IT, difficulty in training people. And now we find that a lot of people want to stay at home. And it's really then the case of whether that's actually adding value to us as a team or whether they're still benefiting from staying at home. So I guess that's something to discuss later in this talk.
Yeah, that is, childcare was particularly challenging during those initial stages. And Rosina, on your side, how did you experience that?
Yes, I suppose as a management consultant and consulting with clients regularly, which you know that face-to-face interaction was something that we very much missed, but adjusted to quite quickly. You know, the IT infrastructure was there for us to be able to do conversations much like this. But I'm a huge fan of rolling sleeves up together and sitting physically in a team. So for some teams, that was quite a big transition. And I think, you know, that example really portrays something that's slightly more subtle in terms of the experiences and changes that I noticed during that shift to hybrid or home working, which was how do we as an organisation really focus in on the culture that we're trying to drive. I was thinking about my experiences of people joining during that period, people joining our organisation during that period, and how do we both instill the culture of the organisation when we can't be physically together, but also for them in terms of knowledge transfer, in terms of side of desk working, how do you really create that? So it's really elevated a number of interactions that you have potentially remotely, and to focus in on, okay, this is my one opportunity to be able to, set a tone for an individual. This is my one opportunity to support them in training, and this is my one opportunity. So it put a lot of emphasis on the interactions that you do have with people, be that remote or otherwise, or on the phone or otherwise. So there was the cultural change, I think, that we went through, and how do you instill that culture? But the new joiner aspect was really important to us. How do we try and create mechanisms to support those individuals in joining an organisation when it could be quite lonely, it could be quite hard to network, it could be quite hard to know the rules of the road in that organisation. So I suppose just to bring a slightly different slant to the previous conversations, but those are some of the things I observed.
Yeah, and Crystal, I see a lot of nodding from you. Is that something that you've come across in your research as well?
And in the literature, these are these issues that are coming up time and time again. So there's obviously the transition to new ways of working is one. Additional workload, a lot of additional workload for people getting their head around new technologies, getting their head around new systems, getting their head around new ways of communication. Quite a significant additional load for all of your managers. So, quite often the focus is on the staff and staff wellbeing, quite rightly, but there's extra work for managers in trying to cope with their own workload increase, then learn how to better support staff. And some of that wellbeing angle, you're covering all of the pillars of wellbeing here. So the people are potentially worried about their physical health, about, if we're going to come back into the office, is it coming back too soon? Is the virus still out there? You've got health conditions with, using technology a lot more at your desk potentially, eye strain, Zoom fatigue, all of these kind of issues. So there's physical health, there's psychological health, people being lonely, people being isolated, not being part of the team, just depression and worry and anxiety about living through a pandemic. There's the social well-being side of it. There's the financial well-being side of it. If people are thinking they might be potentially at one point furlough, or might, are there going to be redundancies? Is my job safe? Managers are trying to navigate people through all of this as well as learn the new job themselves. So there's quite a lot of kind of performance management. How do we performance manage people if they're not at the desk? How do because that kind of FaceTime perception was quite common before, that we can tell people working because they're at the desk. If they're at home, will they be working, won't they be working? How do I check if they're working? Supporting new starters is a big one, and also supporting returners. So if people have been, for example, on maternity since at a certain time during the pandemic, there was people that had gone on maternity before everything changed, and so making sure that people who are coming back after significant periods of time off are being sort of re-inducted, sort of introduced to a whole new way of working. There's a lot going on there, really.
Yeah, I mean, I saw someone who finished off at the offices yesterday and came in for her last day, and her last day was pretty much herself or by herself in the offices, which in itself must be a rather weird experience. But you mentioned all of those aspects, and maybe Rosina, if I can come to you with maybe this next question, how would you say that HR and leadership roles were key in providing support? Maybe not just over the last 2 years, but as we move into this hybrid working environment, how would you say HR and leadership roles were providing that required support?
Yeah, thanks, Albert. And maybe I'll focus on the leadership roles, and Charlene can help me out with the HR roles there. But I mean, from my perspective, at each transition point going into a focused, working from home, mandated working from home requirement, of course, any transition point, leadership roles are absolutely critical, but really elevated the personal connection and the requirement to be very personally connected with their teams at that transition point. I suppose none of us really like to reflect back on that time, or maybe I'm just talking about homeschooling, but the moment where we were all told that we wouldn't be going back into the office or being able to move, that moment, that was a real leadership moment to step in and steady the ship, describe the future, support how employees were feeling, project teams were feeling, and pave a way for how this was going to work, and it would work. I work for an organisation that was fairly flexible anyway. We would work with our clients, we would work in our home offices, we could work from home. So, it wasn't such a huge shift. But of course, we noticed a rise in the number of calls. You couldn't have any of the side chats. You had to schedule a call. So suddenly everybody's diaries filled, and people, it was just back-to-back Zoom calls. And Crystal, you talked about Zoom fatigue, and then you'd need to watch the video because you missed the leadership update. So it was quite intense for a period, when then it all started to settle down a bit. But the leadership role in that context is so critical to kind of step up and pave that way. I know that we used a lot of different communications tools at that stage, and we're advising with our clients about how leaders could connect with people. So we moved to much more video footage, very informal video style updates, very regular, very personal, you know, stood in people's gardens, etc. And that allowed that leadership role to flourish. I would argue that actually it gave a voice to some leaders that elevated their role as a leadership individual within that organisation, because we were looking for it. Organisations were looking for that leadership role.
And Charlene, from a more HR perspective, what was some of the support that you found yourself having to provide to staff members?
Yeah, it was a very busy period for HR, as you can all appreciate. First of all, we needed to provide support to not only line managers but also staff, the leadership team as well. And our leadership team did a fantastic job. Like Rosina said, their communication was excellent. It was also creating a safe space for us so that we could really open up with how we felt, just providing a sense of direction and making sure everyone was on the same page. In terms of HR support, a lot of our time was spent supporting staff with well-being. We had to be there for our colleagues, work to roll out new well-being initiatives, but we had to keep in mind that every single colleague was in different circumstances and was experiencing the pandemic differently, so different things worked for different people. We did step count challenges. We did a Thursday pub club after work, virtual of course. We did quizzes. We did a daily check-in called Fancy a Chat, where there was 15 minutes in everyone's diary every day, and they could just come along and see colleagues virtually, have a chat, just not about work, just about anything. And I think it really worked quite well. On top of all that, I was busy trying to interpret the government guidelines, which were constantly changing, and learning terms such as furlough and what that meant. And it was a really busy time.
And not just busy, but you're also going through the same anxieties, and having to provide that support to staff must have been particularly difficult.
Exactly, yeah. One thing we found is that our staff were, a lot of their jobs and the way the jobs were performed had changed. So if, for example, if you look at the HR role, I'm no longer face-to-face with employees, so I have to work out from online interactions how someone is feeling and how they're doing and what support they need, which is just an extra challenge on top of everything.
Yeah. And Sid, in your managing a small team, some of these challenges must have been pronounced and coming down to you as the leader of the organization.
Yeah, and I think actually with hindsight, we probably struggled quite a lot because we're the sort of the final stop. We are the leader. We are the ones trying to be the IT, be the HR, and be everything else. And I think, yeah, we struggled quite a bit at that time. I think for us, it was very much a case of, Charlene said, about juggling everyone's individual needs. So we'd only taken a trainee on in February. They'd been in the office for sort of 4 weeks and left us learning the ropes, and then literally sitting in his bedroom in his family home trying to train and learn the job and everything like that. And we had to completely change the way that we did everything, because normally we do, say, a 3-month work shadow and, you know, overseeing each other face to face next door to each other at a desk. And all of that had to be changed. And we had to try and manage his needs because it was his first time in an office. Our processes were very different and not set up for it at all, and try and make the trainer and the trainee sort of see things at the same time. We had to adopt, you know, Zoom, screen sharing, all those sort of things, but it actually wasn't enough. And as the rules changed in July, he was actually the first person who said, I want to come back to the office. I need this face-to-face interaction. So then it was a case of having to speak with the HSE, make sure the office was set up accordingly. So then all those other issues arose. So it basically just caused one problem after another, and you felt like you're firefighting. And being a very small team, it was all on our shoulders to firefight. It's me and my number two going, oh my God, have we covered this? Have we covered this? And in conjunction with that, then were the clients. So, we've got a large portfolio of clients who were used to knocking on our door and having a face-to-face meeting. So having to try and communicate to them that the staff weren't all working at the same time, that they weren't there on their regular days, and still meet their client needs. That was another sort of issue across the two, which didn't always align, let's just say. But I think communication to both staff members and to clients was what was imperative. So literally we created a WhatsApp group for different communities and communicating constantly out. We may have over communicated at some point, but I figured if everyone knew what was going on, then that was better than not. So I think there was a lot of IT fatigue from that. When you're in the office, you can just say, oh, blah, blah, please can we talk about this very quickly? And it's done in 2 minutes. When you're on Zoom, you're waiting to see whether they're online or they've got to the toilet. Then, you're kind of not wasting time as such, but there's a lot of build-up of issues. There's a lot of frustrations within the team who weren't used to that at all. But I'd say, a few months in, we got better at it and it worked. But the initial bit was a lot of pressure on the leadership team.
And Crystal, from your perspective, any best practices that came to the forefront in terms of our support or best practices in terms of support leadership?
Yeah, I think it's just kind of good HR and good leadership. It's the concepts that we've come across more broadly in management, and it was just very, very evident on the companies that were doing this well in a time of crisis. So trust. Be leaders that people trust, and trust your staff. So if everyone is working from home, trust that they are going to work if they can, and if they're not working, it's probably because they're anxious, they're depressed, they haven't got the technology. So how can you kind of draw out what supports they need? Autonomy, give people flexibility of their hours as well as just working from home if the job makes that appropriate. Checking in with people, understanding that different people are going to have different preferences and different challenges, and it's not always the obvious ones. So in our research, for example, people were saying it's really great the company did so much for working parents. They understood that homeschooling was a challenge, but I always had to work around everybody else who was homeschooling. So nobody checked in on me, the fact that I was picking everything up in the evenings, when it's because I couldn't get hold of anyone to answer my question during the day. And my boss was phoning me up on the Sunday because, and it's just the kind of, what about me? So, I think it's, recognizing different people's preferences, consulting with your staff. So, with a lot of the stuff that's coming up in the literature around hybrid is that hybrid is kind of the best of both worlds for a lot of people. If it works for them, if that's actually what they want, and if they've had some choice, it's not just it's every Tuesday, Wednesday that you're coming in, regardless of whether that actually suits how their work, how their team meets their other kind of non-work commitments and stuff. So I suppose just some of those kind of buzzwords, that you will, not buzzwords necessarily, concepts that you'll have heard of more broadly. The companies that were doing well and the staff that I've heard, the staff that have been most kind of happy and felt most supported were the ones where the leaders in HR were kind of building in those principles into their decision making and their communications. And communication, as come up before, but even if you're not sure, if you're not sure of whether we're going to be hybrid or how it's going to work, just let people know that you're trying to work it through, and you'll involve them if you can, and that not always everyone's preference is going to get met, and there's reasons for that. I think it's when people are left guessing and they don't really know and they can't plan their. I've got some people I know. This is anecdotal. It's not research, but like friends of mine that they were thinking during COVID, well, maybe I could move. If we're going to be remote forever, I can move out of this tiny little flat in the middle of a city. But nobody was telling them whether that was realistic, whether that was not, and so you sort of stuck waiting to be told.
Yeah. And that drove the Cornwall house prices. But we've focused a lot on that initial stages and maybe some of the more hardships, but inevitably there's going to be some good or positives and negatives that comes out of this new way of work. So maybe maybe we can start with you, Sid, and then anyone feel free to jump in. But what are some of those pros and cons of remote or hybrid working?
Okay, so we are now predominantly hybrid working, and there's only one member of the team who's still choosing to come in the office every single day. But we've put in again, communication, as Crystal said that everyone's got to do a minimum of 50% in the office. Some do more than that out of their own choices. And we've done that to try and maintain that team dynamic. And I think one of the biggest cons that we have found is the loss of the team identity and the interaction between them. Because people aren't sure when people, actually we have a table now that shows who is generally working on what days and whether they're going to be at home or in the office. But early doors, that team identity in a way was lost. And so we've been trying really hard to do more team meetings and carry on with some of the things we did in COVID. But I think that's one of the biggest negatives. Positives are some of the team members actually find that the day that they're at home, they work so much more efficiently, because those water cooler moments that we say are a benefit are also a detriment. So they can just get on, work without any distractions, and they feel that they are more productive. But at the same time, they then find the days that they do come in, they want that interaction again, so they don't feel they could do that every day. I think this is it's going to be expected in the industry. So I think it's important for people to definitely consider hybrid working and think about whether the negatives outweigh the positives or vice versa for each individual team, and see what they want to do to get that balance. And then for us, it's, like I said earlier, about clients and letting them know what's going on, so that that would be a biggest con for us, is that they're not knowing what's going on and not knowing who's going to be around if they call in the office to actually answer a question or want a face-to-face meeting. There's been a lot more planning around that, so everyone's diaries are shared a bit more now, so that we can see that Crystal's working in the office today, so she can meet client X if they want to come in, but not tomorrow. And we don't want them to start calling her on her mobile. We want them to come in on the day she's going to be in. So that logistics has been a bit of a con, but will hopefully become a pro as we get better at communicating that with clients.
And Rosina, anything on your side?
Yeah, I was reflecting on a survey that we did this year with Deloitte in terms of the impact on from a kind of millennial and Gen Z perspective. So I think, we talk a lot about working from home or hybrid, but where they're coming from is flexibility. So I think we need to be really clear about, and sorry, I'll get back to the pro and con in a second, Albert, but I think we need to be really clear about, is it a pro when we specify percentages or days or, however it is to every, I'm picking those generations because it's a survey that we've done, but it's a kind of an interesting reflection, because actually flexibility is just choosing. So, it was widely publicized that we were told that we as Deloitte employees could choose where we worked, when we worked, according to business need. And so that gives us ultimate flexibility. And, I think that is supportive of a number of things, but it does have a detriment in terms of, that absolute flexibility means it's now sometimes quite tricky to get everybody in the same place at the same time. And, I don't think we've necessarily seen a particular impact on this, but I wonder about innovation and creativity and making sure that we maintain, more generally, not just our organisation, but we maintain the ability to be able to direct a little bit in that regard and not become too flexible. And I think many organisations are thinking about that too. So I suppose there's a kind of, thinking about precisely what different employees, organisations want to seek from this situation. How do you satisfy all of that? I mean, real challenges here across generational, across different job types, across different layers of the organisation, leadership, work, project work, delivery, and then how do you then kind of play that out in the context that you want to attract and retain innovation and the employees who will support that? Crystal.
Yeah, I'm thinking that there's really interesting there for kind of any kind of HR people or managers kind of in the audience that are listening, really, how we think about some of these challenges around individual differences and individual preferences. Because yeah, you're going to have some people who really want to come back to the office. You met somebody mentioned, a trainee who's just started, who wants to be in the office, but if the people he needs to learn from don't want to be in the office, he can't come and sit in an office on his own. That's not going to give him what he needs. And in the literature, there's distinctions in terms of preferences. So one, for example, is work-life integrators versus work-life segmenters or segregators. So some people they love going to the office because the commute gives them a mental detachment from my home. I'm changing to a workplace, go and do my hours there, keep it separate, and then at the end of the day, log off my computer, shut the door, decompress on the commute back, and my home is my home. It's nothing to do with work. Keep the two separate. Your integrators tend to like to switch between the two. So they love home working because they can go and do the laundry, they can go and do a yoga thing in the middle of the day, but they're quite happy in the evening to check their emails, fire off a few emails, because they like that flexibility and don't want that segmentation. It's a preference, a mindset preference as much as anything. It's not unhealthy for those people. It's not blurring their boundaries. It's just what they like. So I think maybe in kind of team building scenarios or in training sessions, tell people about do you have a preference of this? How has it been for you? Are you still feeling that you're in control of your work-life boundaries? Are you feeling that it's intruding too much? And then can people in the team be a bit more wary of whose preference what? Can we play to people's strengths? There's another term that I was gonna mention, and it's slipped my mind. But I think there's things that can be done in groups to kind of, so that's the job crafting. Sorry, another one is this idea of we can craft our job to our strengths, and that could be certain activities that we do, but it can also be around the temporal boundaries. It can also be around the location, and kind of giving people an insight into what is within their power and what's not on a job, in terms of how much autonomy over how the job's done, of who they work with, of when they work, and what isn't within their power. And because some people might not be aware of the knock-on impacts on other teams or on clients or whatever, that you can't all just have exactly what you want all the time, because how's that going to work with X, Y, and Z? It's just, again, more about kind of communication, I guess, and training.
I must say, I'm an absolute segregator. So I walked around the house a couple of times before I'd start working to separate work from home. Charlene,
can I just add it was great. The interview data that we did with people who were living on their own, because they didn't have even other people in the house to help with that segregation. And we had some wonderful examples. There's one lady who set up a turbo trainer in her spare room. She'd put it on her gym clothes. She'd do 20 minutes, which was the amount of time it would normally have taken her to walk to work on a little. And it was like to actually do that. And there's people lighting candles in a particular area of the house so that it had a different smell. And it's quite interesting. There's some of the stuff that you can, the creativity that people come up with to maintain that.
Yeah. And Charlene, any maybe pros or cons that you've come across that maybe we haven't mentioned yet?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've talked about commuting time, and we've colleagues have effectively been given their commuting time back. And for some of our colleagues, they were commuting from Glasgow to Edinburgh, so that was a sort of 4-hour round trip per day. So they've been given that time back, which is amazing. It can be used for increased family time, exercising, pursuing hobbies, and even for myself, who didn't have a long commute, I've really enjoyed getting time back, which can be spent on other things. So I think that's a major pro. I think, building on something Sid said earlier, it's really important to realise that some colleagues don't have a home environment that supports effective remote working. We can't just assume that everyone has a home office, and for some the prospect of working from home is quite challenging. So I also know that there's been a huge increase from physios in musculoskeletal problems from working at home, from people not sitting correctly. So it's really important to educate colleagues on the importance of workspace ergonomics, taking regular breaks, sitting correctly. But I think the loneliness and the isolation has been a big challenge, and being separated from colleagues. So I think that's been a difficult one.
And what would you say is maybe the role that technology played in supporting those types of employees?
I think technology has been absolutely crucial over the last 2 years, and I think what the pandemic has actually done is give people a real curiosity around what digital tools are available to them. The obvious ones are sort of Teams, Zoom. People had to get used to using these very, very quickly. So Teams, there's sort of team chats that you can just go on and talk informally with colleagues, which is really good just to start a conversation about something. We've obviously had Zoom Hangouts, and it's interesting as well because a lot of employee engagement has had to turn remote as well. So we've actually been utilising a new tool called Weekly 10, which is an add-on to Teams, and it's supporting employee engagement through giving line managers a method to review check-ins that their team have submitted every week, and provide instant feedback, just really start that conversation and identify extra levels of support that are required.
And Sid, you mentioned in one of your earlier comments that technology was initially a really big element of almost anxiety for you. Has that changed?
Yeah, so initially,
a bit more of a pro for you.
Yeah, and initially we were very much based in the office, so everything was connected to the servers in the office, and that was it. So having to try and get remote access for everything was a big learning curve for us. We're just such a small team; we weren't set up at all for anything like that. So that was really one of our biggest challenges, and that was very, very difficult. I think since then, things have flown much better. Our IT guys got things set up. Everyone can remotely connect when they needed to. We had to obviously look at data protection and GDPR in terms of access of data, which was quite critical as well. But it has meant that for our clients, things are also better. So we've brought in portals for signing, document portals for people to sign their accounts quicker, which we had in the pipeline, but now we sort of had to implement. So there's a lot more forced improvements, which was a bit of a learning curve, very much so, but we did get there. I think one of the negatives, though, is when staff were working at home, was they were checking their mobiles more as well as their laptops. So clients were occasionally texting them because they knew that they were working around the kids or whatever. So I think, again, we talked about those barriers. They weren't necessarily there early doors. Again, now that's developed, so we're still flexibly working, and we give everyone the chance to tell clients if they're working an evening or a weekend if they're choosing to be an integrator, then they're allowing them to communicate that directly to the clients. But I do still feel that some technology has to have some boundaries. So we need to be able to say, stop, don't look at your computer the whole time, don't keep looking at your IT appliances. And I think that's something that while tech has enhanced and given us the ability to do things, I still think it's important to tell my staff to take a break from it quite regularly. Because I think afterwards, after a while, you just don't. It's just you're used to it there being all the time, and you just don't stop from it. So I think that's been an important key driver that we've given back to our staff. And I think in terms of general team stuff, we've been doing like Zoom meetings and like having lunch together occasionally where we can doing quizzes and things like that. So it's been an enabler from that perspective. But I think on the whole, we had a bowling night out recently. Team loved that. That's that face-to-face interaction, just can't beat that. So tech's been a good thing, but face-to-face is still there.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned some of those, some of those boundaries. Maybe Crystal, if I can rope you in on that. Even though technology has been hugely helpful, but are there some, call them warning signs or red lights that one should be looking at when it comes to using technology in a remote working environment?
I mean, yeah, it's flexible working itself, has long been kind of associated with work extensification. So, people working longer hours. Sometimes if you're not visible at your desk 9 to 5, there's this feeling that well, I need to prove that I am working and I'm constantly available. So I'm saying, you've done me a favour, so I'm gonna need to pay you back by showing that I'm constantly working and I'm constantly available. You know, the literature on remote working, you know, for a long time has talked about, you know, remote devices not really helping with that, and people feeling this need to check in all the time. And you know, social media as well, you know, people quite often, if they're connected, if that's connected with the work, the Twitter accounts or whatever, to be kind of checking that in, and you're not getting that kind of psychological detachment, that proper break from kind of thinking about work and thinking about work issues. And I think there's potentially other dangers as well with, you know, the increased use of technology and people being not visibly at the desk in terms of kind of remote surveillance. So some organisations have been kind of monitoring their staff by accessing the cameras, or how many times people are tapping the keyboards and things like that. And I think there's obviously real issues there around trust and around privacy and around well-being, you know, really, that people are gonna, that's not really the kind of healthy stuff. And then the techno stress, they're just overloaded with meetings and stuff. I think, you know, the pandemic, that was particularly problematic because a lot of people were wanting to use those sort of technologies for social support, you know, outside of working hours. And a lot of people that we spoke to, people who lived on their own, they had no one to talk to apart from if they were going to go on Zoom again in the evening, and they're just, I can't do it, I've been on all day, I've been on meetings. So kind of work was, you know, not only was it kind of giving them additional kind of job demands, it was taking away these potential for resources outside of work to kind of recover and avoid the kind of the loneliness.
I know for me in the beginning stages, nothing was quite as tiring as a Zoom meeting for some reason. I still don't understand why, but it feels much more cognitively taxing for some reason. But before we get to some of the questions that the audience has posed, what would you say does the future of work look like? And maybe more specifically, in terms of career development opportunities, how will that look like into the future? Maybe Rosina, I see Charlene is
Sorry, I was just going to say, I think the future of work definitely seems to be hybrid. I can't see many companies returning to complete full-time office working. But I mean, for us, we've definitely adopted a hybrid approach and given people the freedom to base themselves where they're most productive. And we've fallen into quite a good pattern of some days in the office, some days at home, which seems to be working well for now. But it presents both opportunities and challenges for career development, I think. And I think HR have a responsibility to ensure that everyone has access to career development opportunities and continuous learning wherever they're based. So I think for the future, conversations around talent planning, talent development have to become a lot more frequent, as well as really looking at what skills are required for the future and how to develop those in colleagues.
Can I just add as well, you know, the flexibility itself is something that you need to be bearing in mind when it comes to talent development and promotion and stuff, and that there's not that kind of historic flexibility stigma.
Yeah.
Whereas that, you know, that the people that choose to work from home, if you're giving people a choice, are not then the ones that are, oh, well, we never see them, and, you know, kind of informal opportunities for getting involved in stuff that might be good for your career. So as well as the formal training programs, just the, you know, the historic, you know, old boys club, you know, someone's visible, so you come out to this opportunity or accompany me to this or just get involved in this. That you know, you're not penalising people, because that, you know, there is going to be an intersection there with parents with children, you know, and other people who have particular reasons why they're potentially preferring to do a bit more from home, and people with disabilities and so on, you know, that you don't want to be reinforcing divides of opportunity.
And Crystal, I think that places, just going back to the point we were making earlier around the leadership roles, you know, I think that places even more emphasis on, if you're a leader in the organisation, what is the role that you're playing? You know, the EDI aspects need to come absolutely to the fore. You know, how do you choose to work in that context, and how are you setting the tone for the rest of your organisation to work in that context as well? Particularly as, you know, day to day, you know, this week has been a bit chaotic. I've been in the office one day, I've been at home one day, I've been with my clients another day. I've been, when you are all slightly transient, keeping abreast of those sorts of things as well, it is even more so important. I think we think about the future of work in terms of workplace and workforce, and so thinking about the consequences on of hybrid on all of those, I think is really important for organizations. And what is the type of work? How do we expect our leaders of all levels to behave as we go into this hybrid approach? How are we facilitating a culture of hybrid? What does the workplace offer? What is the workplace? We haven't even touched on the sort of implications of the physical office and how that needs to be set up, and the emphasis on tech that we were talking about earlier, goodness me, not just from home, but also back in the office as well. Have we got all the tech that's needed there? And I think, being able to navigate working in that way is going to have a real implication on what future jobs look like. These are going to be core skills now that people are required to be able to do. From the basic of being able to pick up on, over a screen how somebody is feeling, through to how do you build relationships with people you've never met before, and in our context, allow them to trust us with some of their major transformation programs. Like that's a whole new game, right? It's not the face-to-face interaction. And then I suppose as well, from a workforce perspective, thinking about how do we train up our people to be able to work in that way? How do we onboard new hires? How do we think about all of those aspects pull together to be able to think about what the future of work looks like and the implications for organizations there? I think talking about we were talking about new entrants to the workforce. I think being attuned to that is the context that you are joining is going to be really important. Knowing that is what you're entering, and understanding how that plays out in the various organizations that you are being interviewed at, I think is absolutely key. If you come for an interview, it should be one of those key questions that you ask now to understand whether that's going to feel right for you. I think we have just moved on to a different way of working, but it's going to be different in different contexts.
I think there's something about celebrating and recognising what everyone's been through and all of the adapting and all of the learning that's taken place as well, and the skills that people can bring. So if you are interviewed for roles and you think about how you've adapted, whether it be to previous jobs, previous work, or even studies or things like that, I think organisations could probably celebrate a bit more some of the innovation that's gone on in terms of social support for each other and some of the novel things. Because I think you mentioned, Charlene, some of the corporate level HR social events and things that have been put on, but in our interviews there was a lot of kind of ground up stuff going on as well. There's a lot of people with it at team level and even between organizations and stuff who were really coming up with some novel things to get everyone together and to feel connected and stuff. So I think we can recognize that and celebrate some of that, and it is skills, it's transferable skills that people can use when they're marketing themselves as well.
I think it's also important for the leadership to ensure that their values are disseminated to the rest of the team really, really early on. Because I think that's how you realise whether the team is, for someone coming in, whether they want to work in that team, if they've got the same ideologies. So I think maybe that's something we've been promoting a lot more over the last couple of years. Before it was like kind of, it's just there and this is how we all vibe together. But it's something that we've really tried to communicate back to the employees and the rest of the team, and especially for the new starters, for them to sort of think, do they fit in? What are the other people like who they could possibly be working with? Are they all on the same level? So I think that information is really, really important. And then every person can still show expertise through the quality of their work, through open communication, by having a dialogue with their team managers. I think that's sort of something they should be open to doing. So not just sort of sitting in their corner at home, scribbling away and getting some work done, telling people what they've been doing and being proud of what they've done. And on the converse of that, if they're having struggles, communicating that as well, so that everyone's able to deal with them early doors, which you don't get when you're not face to face as easily, because people don't know what you're working on or whether you are struggling in the back corner somewhere. Whereas when you are in an office environment, someone can pick that up a bit more easily. We're not actually sitting there working away at our laptops, looking at each other constantly like you would be in the office. So you don't know whether someone's having a cry in the corner or something. So unless there's that open communication, you're never going to get that. And I know some people will struggle with that communication and doing that. But I guess if you can show you've got an open door to your team members, let them know that maybe you've struggled as well, and showing that rapport, I think, is really, really important. And then generally in terms of career development, I guess more mentoring. So making sure that's actively happening within the business, so that people can see either a development path personally or career path as well.
So one of the themes that's coming up from the questions posted by the, I'm going to call them audience, even though we can't see them, is what support, or how do you support people with maybe mental health issues that's arisen as a result of home or hybrid working, and then maybe by extension, how do you go about including people who maybe be excluded by flexible or hybrid working, or supporting people with special needs that maybe that we take for granted? It's a bit of a loaded question, Charlene, but maybe from an HR perspective, if you would like to venture a answer on that.
Yeah, in terms of the mental health support, we have 4 trained mental health first aiders who are colleagues, and they've been through the formal training course, really enjoyed that. So they're there to offer support. But in terms of an extra layer of support, we've actually just invested in an employee assistance program called Thrive, which has access to counselling services amongst many other things. So I think that's just, as I say, an extra layer of support that colleagues can turn to if needs be. I think we were talking about skills needed, and I think empathy is a huge skill that managers need to develop, along with emotional intelligence, so that they can really just realize where their team are struggling and what kind of support is needed.
And Rosina, maybe for you working in a bigger or a larger organization, so one of the questions is, how are different groups, maybe as an example, the neurodivergent people, being supported?
I think my gut response to that, Albert, is that whilst working in a very large organisation, we've taken a number of case-by-case situations very carefully and very sensitively throughout. So I think, the big organisation breaks down into teams, and we have quite a structured approach to supporting our people. And we call them people leaders within our organisation, and they have a small group of individuals that they support throughout their project life. And early on in working from a from home perspective, but that carries on now as we return to a new normal. We will always be cognizant of individual needs across the patch. Could be anything from a caring responsibility through to very particular needs from a neurodivergent perspective, and we work through those within those teams and within the team that they're working with. So I would say some of those mechanisms were more important at some of the peaks when we were kind of dramatically shifted, but really it was amplifying some of the processes that we would have had in place anyway to support individuals with different characteristics.
Yeah, I suppose what I'm getting from that is just that maybe the type of support would change, but it's not the approach to support necessarily changed. Crystal, I see you wanted to add there.
Yeah, just my research is mainly on kind of the work-life interface and well-being at work particularly. And I think a lot of it just comes back to the management of people. And I think line managers are, are really crucial in this. So making sure that your line managers are fully supported, fully trained to be aware that, mental health challenges particularly, there might be more people struggling at the moment, to be aware of all of the resources at a corporate level that you might have, whether it's an employee assistance program, actual counselling, CBT courses or whatever, and then the principle of reasonable adjustments. So reasonable adjustments is in the Equality Act for people with a disability, and some people may well, their mental health condition may well fall under the Equality Act as a disability, but you can use the principle of reasonable adjustments much more broadly, I think, which is just speaking to the individual, trying to ascertain what actually the problem is. For some people it might be something to do with isolation and loneliness, in which case it might be that there's just more check-ins with you, more integration into team discussions and events, talking through some of the anxieties, if it is something to do with anxiety of a new way of working, or the new systems, new processes, new people, or whatever it is. It might be just having some time to talk through it might go towards alleviating it. For some people, it's going to be an adjustment to workload. You might have to take some duties off them for a time. For some people, you might need time off. You might need a proper break from work, and it's trying to ascertain what the issues are, what support's needed, and what's reasonable. So it's always within this kind of broader umbrella of what's the resources of the organisation, what's the size of the organisation, what's the capacity of the rest of the team, because if you're going to reduce workload, then somebody else is probably going to have to pick it up, and we don't want that always to be the line managers that then become ill themselves because they're trying to field everyone's needs. But yeah, I think it is something that from the literature and from just anecdotally, we've all recognised a lot of people are struggling, not always work related. It's worries about relatives, it's worried about health, it's worries about finances, it's worries about the climate. All these different things that they both spill over. So work worries and concerns can spill over into your non-work time and your health, but broader concerns can spill over into affecting your performance at work and things as well.
Maybe we've got time for one last question. Do you think, and whoever feels most qualified to answer this can jump in, but do you think that career opportunities have changed as a result of the pandemic, and has it affected younger people more?
I'd say yes. I think there's a lot more options for people to travel, so do jobs that aren't based in London or based in Manchester. There's been a lot more flexibility there. So there's definitely a pro from that example, in that situation. Not in finance, but I've got cousins who have been trained remotely, are working remotely in jobs that they never thought they'd do before, because that travel is not needed anymore. And there's been a bigger market, I guess, that they can get into. I'd say converse to that, though, is the unsurety for them. They're like, is this the right path for me? The guidance has been maybe limited in how they can develop those career paths. But I think on the whole, there are more opportunities there for people who are happy to try different things and not stick to the same career path that they had previously.
Okay. We've actually, thank you for that, and thank you all of you for joining. We've run out of time. It was a really, really good conversation. How time flies when you're having fun. I suppose the last order of business is just to say happy birthday to Crystal. Hope you get to enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you so much for everyone who joined.